It was supposed to be a quick hike, until a family vanished forever. The first thing they found was the dog. A golden retriever named Gus, shivering and whining, his leash tangled in a thicket of manzanita just off the trail. His fur was matted with pine needles and something dark and sticky that made the deputy's stomach clench. It was blood, not Gus's blood. The vet would confirm that later, his gentle hands probing the dog's ribs, finding no wounds, only the deep, shuddering tremors of a terror he couldn't name. But for now, in the fading light of a Sunday evening, the sight of the dog alone was a silent scream in the vast indifferent quiet of the San Jacinto wilderness. The search party, a loose collection of park rangers and local volunteers, had been combing the Devil's Slide Trail for less than an hour. The call had come in from a frantic grandmother in Pasadena. Her son, David, his wife, Sarah, and their 2 children, 8-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Mason, were late. Hours late. They were supposed to be back by 4 for Mason's soccer practice. David was never late. He was a man who set 3 alarms, who double-knotted his shoelaces, who packed a color-coded itinerary for a simple day hike. For him to be out of contact as the sun bled out behind the granite peaks was not just unusual. It was unthinkable. They're just enjoying the sunset. His mother, Eleanor, had told the dispatcher, her voice a thin crackling thing over the phone. David loves the sunsets up there. He probably just lost track of time, but the dispatcher heard the lie she was telling herself, the frantic prayer masquerading as an excuse. He heard the tremor that said something is wrong. Ranger Mike Thompson, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked creases, knelt beside the whimpering retriever. He unclipped the leash, his movements slow, deliberate. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. Gus just pressed his head into Mike's palm, a low guttural moan escaping his throat. It was a sound of profound grief, a sound no animal should ever make. Mike ran his flashlight over the ground, the beam cutting a nervous swath through the encroaching darkness. He saw the scuff marks first, chaotic spray of dirt and pine duff, the kind of disturbance made by a sudden, violent struggle, not a fall. This was different. This was a fight. Then he saw the water bottle. It was Lily's, pink, with a unicorn decal peeling off the side. It lay half-crushed, its plastic body dented, as if by a powerful grip. A few feet away, a small blue baseball cap, Mason's favorite, the one he wore backwards like his dad. It was snagged on a low-hanging branch, a silent, forlorn flag of surrender. The air grew colder, heavier. The scent of pine and damp earth was suddenly suffocating, thick with an unspoken menace. This wasn't just a family who had lost their way. This was a crime scene. Mike stood up, his radio crackling to life on his hip. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Thompson. I've got a visual on the family's dog, Gus. He's alive, but I'm seeing some personal effects scattered off-trail. Mile marker 2.5. Looks like a possible struggle. I need forensics up here, and seal off the trailhead. Nobody else comes up this mountain tonight." The words hung in the air, swallowed by the immense silence of the forest. The search party, hearing the gravity in his tone, fell quiet. Their headlamps, which had been dancing through the trees like anxious fireflies, now froze, pointing towards Mike, waiting. The friendly weekend atmosphere of a community helping its own had evaporated, replaced by a cold, professional dread. Over the next few hours, the scene transformed. The quiet trail became a stage, illuminated by the harsh, sterile glare of portable floodlights, yellow tape, stark and alien against the gnarled bark of the pines, cordoned off a widening perimeter. Men and women in crisp uniforms moved with a hushed, methodical purpose, their faces grim masks in the artificial light. They photographed the scuff marks, bagged the water bottle and the cap, and took samples of the blood on Gus's fur. They found a half-eaten granola bar, a single child's hiking boot, Lily's, the left one, and a set of car keys lying innocuously in the middle of the path. As if they'd simply been dropped, but there was no sign of the family. No David, no Sarah, no Lily, no Mason. It was as if the mountain had opened its great stone mouth and swallowed them whole. They searched all night, their lights cutting futile patterns into the darkness. Their calls echoing unanswered through the canyons. David, Sarah. The names became a desperate, rhythmic chant against the chirping of crickets and the sighing of the wind. By dawn, the search had swelled. News vans with their towering satellite antennas clogged the small parking lot at the base of the trail. Reporters with microphones and hungry eyes ambushed anyone in a uniform, their questions sharp and invasive. Is this a kidnapping? Are there any suspects? Is it true you found blood? Inside the makeshift command post, a converted RV humming with the static of radios and the low murmur of anxious conversation. Sheriff John Rollins stared at a topographical map of the mountain. His face, usually ruddy and quick to smile, was drawn and pale. He'd known David Miller since they were kids. They'd played Little League together on a dusty field 2 towns over. He'd watched David grow up, become an architect, marry his high school sweetheart, and raise 2 beautiful kids. The Millers were not the kind of people this happened to. They were good people, the kind of family that made you believe in the quiet, simple decency of the world. Anything? Rollins asked, his voice raw with exhaustion. A young deputy, barely old enough to shave, shook his head. Nothing, sir. We've got teams sweeping every trail, every ravine. The helicopter is doing thermal scans. It's like they just vanished. Rollins ran a hand over his face. The stubble rasping against his palm, vanished. It was a word that didn't belong here, in the solid, tangible world of rocks and trees. People didn't just vanish, they left a trail, a clue, a reason. But the Millers had left nothing but a terrified dog and a handful of heartbreakingly ordinary objects. The media frenzy grew with each passing hour. The story was a nightmare tailored for the 24-hour news cycle. A beautiful all-American family, a scenic hike, a mysterious disappearance. The photos of the Millers were everywhere. David, tall and smiling, with Mason perched on his shoulders. Sarah, her arm around a gap-toothed lily, her expression radiating a gentle maternal warmth. They were the perfect victims, their wholesome, happy faces, a stark contrast to the sinister mystery that now shrouded their fate. Speculation ran rampant. It was a mountain lion, some said. A bear, but the rangers shook their heads. An animal. Attack would have been messy, brutal. It would have left a body. Others whispered of a kidnapping for ransom, but no call had come. The Millers were comfortable, but not wealthy enough to attract that kind of professional high-stakes crime. The theories grew wilder, darker. A random act of violence by a transient, a drug-addled drifter living off the grid in the deep woods. A family annihilator, a secret monster hiding behind David's friendly suburban dad facade. The internet, with its bottomless appetite for tragedy, churned out conspiracies and accusations with a sickening ghoulish glee. For 3 days, the search continued, a massive, desperate operation that yielded nothing. The hope that had flickered in the first few hours, now guttered and died, replaced by a grim, unspoken certainty. They were no longer searching for the living. They were searching for bodies. Gus, the retriever, was taken in by Eleanor, David's mother. He would lie by the door, his tail giving a hopeful thump whenever a car pulled into the driveway. His sad, brown eyes fixed on the road, waiting for a family that would never come home. On the 4th day, a volunteer, a retired firefighter, named Hank, found something. He had wandered off the main search grid, following a gut feeling. A hunch that led him down a steep, treacherous gully, choked with poison oak and thorny bushes. It was a place the official search teams had deemed impassable. And there, tucked beneath a granite overhang, almost completely obscured by a curtain of wild grapevines, was a small, canvas backpack. Mason's. Hank's heart hammered against his ribs, as he called it. The forensics team descended into the gully like spiders, on a thread, their white suits ghostly in the dappled sunlight. They opened the backpack with excruciating care. Inside, they found a half-empty juice box, a collection of interesting rocks, a toy dinosaur, and a smartphone. It was Sarah's phone. The battery was dead. They rushed it back to the lab, their hopes soaring. A phone could hold everything: GPS, data, photos, videos, Final desperate text messages. It could be the key, the one thing that could unlock the terrible silence of the mountain. The lead technician worked for hours, his face illuminated by the glow of his computer screen. He managed to bypass the lock screen, to coax the dead device back to life, to access its memory. And what he found made him push his chair back from the desk, his face ashen. He called Sheriff Rollins immediately. His voice was strained, tight. "Sheriff," he said, "you need to see this. You need to see it right now." Rollins drove to the lab, his siren a lonely wail in the night. The technician didn't say a word. He just turned the monitor towards the sheriff and pressed play. It was a video. The timestamp showed it was taken at 2:17 p.m. on the day the Millers disappeared. The image was shaky, chaotic, filmed from a low angle, as if the phone had been dropped or was being held by a trembling hand. The sound was a horrifying cacophony of panicked screams, a child's high-pitched wail of "mummy," and a man's voice, guttural and enraged, shouting words that were lost in the wind and the terror. But it was the image that stopped Rawlins's heart. For a fleeting, sickening second, the camera panned up, capturing a face. It was a man. But not David. His features were contorted in a mask of pure, predatory rage. His eyes, cold and dark, burned with a terrifying intensity. And in his hand, he held a gun. The video cut out abruptly, plunging the screen into darkness. But the image was burned into Rawlins's mind. He knew that face. He'd seen it 100 times, smiling from campaign posters, beaming from the local news, shaking hands at town hall meetings. It was a face everyone in the valley knew. It was the face of Judge Thomas Harding, a man lauded for his unwavering commitment to justice. A pillar of the community, a man who had built a career and a reputation on the very laws he was now so monstrously, so undeniably, breaking. The silence in the lab was absolute, broken only by the hum of the computer. The technician stared at Rollins, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Sheriff," he whispered, "what do we do?" Rollins felt a cold wave of nausea wash over him. This wasn't a random drifter. This wasn't a mountain lion. This was something infinitely worse. This was a man with power, with influence, with the entire legal system at his beck and call. A man who could bury them, with a single phone call. He looked at the frozen image on the screen, at the face of a monster hiding in plain sight, and he felt the solid ground of his world crumble into a bottomless abyss. The Millers hadn't just vanished, they had been erased. And the man who held the eraser was the one man he might not be able to stop. The cliffhanger was no longer just about finding a missing family. It was about confronting a powerful evil that had been festering right under their noses. An evil that had just declared war. The man on the screen, Judge Thomas Harding, was not just a face on a campaign poster. He was an institution. In the small, tightly knit community of Pine Ridge, he was a titan. A man whose name was synonymous with integrity and moral certitude. He lived in a sprawling custom-built lodge on the wealthiest slope of the mountain, a fortress of cedar and glass that looked down, both literally and figuratively, on the rest of the valley. His wife, Isabel, was a fragile bird-like woman who chaired every charity committee and whose garden parties were the stuff of local legend. They were the town's royalty, untouchable and revered. Harding had built his career on a foundation of tough and crime rhetoric. His courtroom was a place of reckoning, where he delivered sentences with a grim Old Testament finality. He was known for his eloquent, damning summations, his voice a resonant baritone that could make the most hardened criminal tremble. He spoke of family values, of community safety, of the sacred trust between the law and the people it served. To the public, he was the sheepdog guarding the flock. But the video on Sarah Miller's phone showed the sheepdog was a wolf. Sheriff. Rawlins felt a tremor of fear, cold and sharp, snake up his spine. It wasn't the physical fear of a confrontation, but the deeper, more insidious fear of a system collapsing in on itself. To accuse Judge Harding was not just to accuse a man. It was to attack the very bedrock of their town's identity. It was to declare that the scales of justice were not just unbalanced, but held by a murderer. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that this would not be a simple arrest. It would be a war, fought not with guns, but with whispers, with favors, with the tangled, invisible web of power that Harding had spent a lifetime weaving. The victim was no longer just a missing person. She was a ghost with a story to tell. Sarah Miller, whose phone held the damning evidence, was more than the smiling mother in the news clippings. She had been a paralegal before her children were born, a sharp, inquisitive woman with a quiet strength. Friends remembered her as fiercely protective of her family. A mama bear who had once stared down a school principal over a bullying incident involving Lily. She was organized, meticulous, the kind of person who documented everything. It was a habit that had, in the end, become her final, desperate act of witness. David, her husband, was the gentle counterpoint to her fierce love. An architect who specialized in sustainable design. He was a man who believed in building things that lasted. He was quiet, thoughtful, a lover of nature and poetry. He was the family's anchor, their calm center in a chaotic world. The thought of his gentle hands, the hands that had taught his son how to throw a baseball and his daughter how to tie her shoes, being used to fend off a violent attacker, made Rollins's stomach turn, and the children. Lily, with her missing tooth and her love for unicorns. Mason, with his backwards cap and his pockets full of rocks. They were the heart of it. The innocent, trusting souls caught in a storm they couldn't possibly have understood. Their absence was a physical ache in the community, a void that could never be filled. The hidden witness in this unfolding tragedy was not a person, but an object, a small silver locket that Lily always wore. It had been a gift from her grandmother, Eleanor, and inside were two tiny, perfectly folded photographs. One of her mother, one of her father. The locket was not among the items found on the trail. It was not in the backpack. It was missing. A small, insignificant detail in the grand scheme of the investigation. But one that nagged at Rollins, a tiny discordant note in the symphony of horror. The antagonist, Judge Harding, had his own ghosts. Publicly, his life was a testament to success. But there were whispers, rumors that slithered through the town's underbelly like snakes in the grass. Stories of a volatile temper, of courtroom tirades that bordered on unhinged, of a drinking problem that was carefully, meticulously concealed. There was the story of his first wife, who had left him decades ago. Fleeing in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and a black eye she later claimed was from walking into a door. The story was quickly buried, dismissed as the bitter ramblings of a scorned woman. And there was his son, Julian. A troubled, haunted young man who had died of a supposed overdose a year prior. Julian had been the town's golden boy, a star athlete with a charming smile. But those who knew him well saw the darkness in his eyes, the frantic, desperate energy of a boy drowning in his father's shadow. The official story was that Julian had a secret drug problem, a tragic flaw in an otherwise perfect life. But now, in the harsh glare of Sarah Miller's video, Rollins began to wonder. He remembered the closed-casket funeral, the judge's stoic, unreadable expression, the way Isabel Harding had seemed to shrink into herself. A ghost at her own son's memorial. The connection, the motive, was still a gaping black hole. Why the Millers? What could this ordinary family have possibly done to provoke the wrath of a man like Thomas Harding? Rollins tasked his most trusted detective, a sharp, cynical woman named Maria Diaz, with digging into the judge's life, into every case he'd ever tried, every property he owned, every secret he'd ever buried. I want to know what he had for breakfast every day for the last 10 years, Maria Rollins said, his voice low and intense. I want to know who he talks to, who he owes, and who fears him. Start with his son. Start with Julian. Diaz nodded, her dark eyes already distant, her mind sifting through the possibilities. She was a bloodhound, a relentless pursuer of the truth, and she smelled a lie. A big one. The first confrontation was subtle, a polite, professional dance of veiled threats and feigned ignorance. Rollins knew he couldn't go in with sirens blazing. He had to play the game. He requested a meeting with the judge at his chambers, under the guise of giving him a routine update on the Miller case, a courtesy afforded to a prominent community leader. Harding's chambers were like the man himself, imposing, immaculate, and cold. The walls were lined with leather-bound law books that looked as if they'd never been opened. A massive oak desk, polished to a mirror sheen, separated the two men. Harding sat in a backed leather chair, his hands steepled beneath his chin, his expression a carefully crafted mask of solemn concern. "This is a terrible tragedy, John," Harding said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "A stain on our community. I trust you're doing everything in your power to find the animals who did this." Rollins met his gaze, his own expression carefully neutral. "We're pursuing every lead, Judge. Every possibility." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "It's a strange case. No ransom note, no witnesses, just chaos, and a video." He saw it then, a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening around Harding's eyes. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, but it was enough. "A video?" Harding asked, his voice still perfectly level. "From Sarah Miller's phone," Rollins said, watching him. "Damaged, but we recovered a fragment. A few seconds, it's not much to go on, shaky, poor quality, but it shows." A face. Harding did not flinch. He simply raised an eyebrow, a perfect pantomime of curiosity. "And, have you identified this person?" "Not yet," Rollins lied. "Like I said, the quality is poor. It could be anyone, a hiker, a drifter. We're sending it to the state lab for enhancement." It was a bluff, a calculated risk. He was letting Harding know that he had the tape, but also giving him the illusion of time, the chance to believe he could still control the narrative. He wanted to see how the wolf would react when it knew the hunter was on its trail. Harding leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. He smiled, a thin, humorless slash across his face. "Well, I hope it yields something. The sooner we can bring this family justice, the better. Let me know if there's anything I can do. My resources, my connections. They're at your disposal." The offer was a threat, cloaked in the language of assistance. "I am powerful. I am watching you. Tread carefully." Rollins stood up. The meeting concluded. "Thank you, Judge. We'll be in touch." As he walked out of the courthouse, the sun felt harsh, unforgiving. The world seemed to have split into two realities. There was the one the town saw, the grieving community, the diligent sheriff, the concerned judge. And then there was the other one, the one only he and a handful of others knew, a world of dark secrets, of unimaginable violence, and of a monster wearing a robe. The weight of that knowledge was a physical burden, pressing down on him, suffocating him. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that Judge Harding would not wait for the state lab. He would act. The escalation was coming, and he had to be ready. He had just prodded the beast in its lair, and now he had to wait for it to strike. The quiet war for the soul of Pine Ridge had just begun. The escalation began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A single venomous rumor, planted with surgical precision, that spread through Pine Ridge like a virus. It started on a local online forum, a post by an anonymous user claiming to be a concerned friend of the Miller family. The post hinted at a dark secret. David Miller, the mild-mannered architect, was supposedly deep in debt to a dangerous loan shark from the city. The hike, the post suggested, wasn't a family outing, it was a meeting. A deal gone wrong. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. The Millers were no longer perfect victims. They were flawed, secretive, perhaps even complicit in their own demise. The public, hungry for a simple explanation, a reason to distance themselves from the terrifying randomness of the crime, latched onto the story. It was easier to believe in a secret debt than in a monster living in their midst. Sympathy began to curdle into suspicion. The prey for the Millers' signs that had dotted the town's lawns began to look a little faded. A little neglected. Sheriff Rollins knew, with every fiber of his being, that it was Harding's work. It was a classic move, a tactic straight from a high-powered defense attorney's playbook: discredit the victim. He ordered Diaz to run a full financial check on David Miller. The results came back, as he expected, claimed the Millers had a mortgage, a car loan, and some credit card debt, but nothing out of the ordinary. They were financially stable, even prosperous. The loan shark story was a complete fabrication, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Then came the second strike. This one aimed directly at Rollins. An article appeared in the regional newspaper, penned by a journalist known for his sensationalist, attack dog style. The piece questioned the competence of the sheriff's department, highlighting the lack of progress in the case. It quoted an anonymous source within law enforcement who claimed Rollins was fixated on a bizarre and unsubstantiated theory, ignoring more plausible leads. The source, of course, was Harding. His words laundered through a willing reporter. The pressure from the county supervisors began to mount. Rollins was called into a closed-door meeting, the air thick with political anxiety. They wanted answers. They wanted an arrest. They wanted the media storm to go away. "John, what's this I hear about you harassing Judge Harding?" One of the supervisors, a portly man named Henderson, asked, his tone accusatory. "The man is a pillar of this community. He's grieving, along with the rest of us, and you're treating him like a suspect." "I'm following the evidence," Rollins said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "What evidence?" Henderson scoffed. "A blurry video that you admit you can't even get a clear image from. A gut feeling. This isn't some TV show, John. This is the real world. You're on a witch hunt, and you're making us all look like fools." Rollins felt the walls closing in. Harding wasn't just attacking the case. He was attacking the investigation itself, using his influence to poison the well, to turn Rollins's own superiors against him. He was isolating him, cutting him off from his support system, leaving him an army of one. Meanwhile, Diaz was hitting a wall of her own. Every inquiry she made into Judge Harding's past was met with a polite but firm stonewall. His financial records were sealed by a court order he himself had signed years ago, citing security concerns. The official report on his son Julian's death was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obfuscation. A single page that listed the cause as accidental overdose with no supporting toxicology report or investigator's notes. The case file was suspiciously thin, as if it had been scrubbed clean. "It's like the guy's a ghost," Diaz said, frustration etched on her face. She sat across from Rollins in his office late one night, the room littered with empty coffee cups and takeout containers. "Everyone I talk to, from his former clerks to the guy who landscapes his yard, they're all terrified of him. They speak in whispers. They look over their shoulders. He's got the whole town locked down in fear." The witness, the silent, silver locketry enigma. Rollins had spoken to Eleanor, David's mother, a dozen times. She described the locket in perfect detail, her voice trembling with grief. "Lily never took it off," she insisted. "Never. It was her treasure. Its absence was a screaming anomaly, a piece of the puzzle that simply didn't fit. If this was a robbery, why leave the car keys and take a child's trinket? If it was a kidnapping, why discard the backpack and the phone? Nothing made sense." The antagonist, emboldened by the success of his smear campaign, grew more audacious. One evening, as Rollins was driving home, a sleek black sedan, the same model as Harding's, pulled up behind him. It followed him for miles, staying just far enough back to be deniable, but close enough to be a clear message. When Rollins finally pulled into his driveway, the sedan paused at the end of the street, its headlights cutting through the darkness, before accelerating away into the night. It was a naked act of intimidation. A reminder that Harding's reach extended beyond the courthouse, that he could touch Rollins whenever he wanted. The cruelty of the judge's campaign was most acutely felt by Eleanor, a widow in her 70s. She was now forced to endure not only the unimaginable grief of losing her entire family, but also the slander against her son's name. Her phone rang with calls from reporters. Her quiet life was shattered. One afternoon, Diaz found her sitting on her porch, staring blankly at the pray for the Miller sign on her lawn, which someone had defaced during the night. Scrolling the word criminals across it in angry red spray paint. Isabel Harding. The judge's wife also began to show signs of the strain. She was seen in town less and less. When she did appear, she looked even more fragile than usual, her eyes wide and haunted, her movements jerky and nervous. Diaz, on a hunch, tried to approach her at a local market. "Mrs. Harding," Diaz said gently. "I'm Detective Diaz. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the day the Millers disappeared." Isabel flinched as if struck. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. I can't," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Thomas, .. He said not to talk to anyone." She clutched her purse to her chest, like a shield, and practically fled, leaving Diaz standing alone in the aisle, more certain than ever that Isabel knew something. She was a prisoner in her own life, a witness silenced by fear. The turning point, the moment the escalating tension snapped, came from an unexpected source. A junior deputy, a tech-savvy kid named Peterson, had been tasked with a seemingly mundane job, creating a digital timeline of the Millers' last day, using cell tower data, credit card receipts, and security camera footage from the town. He was piecing together the final hours of their lives. A digital ghost story told in timestamps and data points. He was cross-referencing the cell tower pings from Sarah Miller's phone with other phones that had pinged the same remote tower near the Devil's Slide trailhead that afternoon. It was a long shot, a search for a digital needle in a haystack. He ran the numbers for every phone that had been in that remote, sparsely populated area, and he found a match. A single, brief ping. A phone that had been in the exact same location as Sarah's, at the exact same time as the video was recorded. The number was registered to a disposable burner phone, the kind used by criminals and spies. Untraceable, a dead end. But Peterson was meticulous. He didn't stop there. He ran the burner phone's number through their database, checking to see if it had ever communicated with any other known numbers, and he got a hit. A single text message, sent 2 days before the Millers disappeared. The recipient of that text was a number Peterson recognized immediately. He had seen it on the contact list for the county supervisors. On the letterhead for the courthouse, he shot out of his chair, his heart pounding. He ran down the hall to Rollins's office, bursting through the door without knocking. "Sheriff," he gasped, out of breath. "I've got him. I've got Harding." He laid the printout on Rollins's desk. Rollins stared at it, his eyes tracing the lines that connected the untraceable burner phone to the single, damning number. The number belonged to Judge Thomas Harding. It was his private cell, the one he used for sensitive court business. The connection was undeniable, a digital thread that tied the judge directly to the scene of the crime. The wolf had made a mistake. He had used his personal phone to communicate with his disposable one, a moment of arrogance, of carelessness. That had just ripped a hole in the web of lies he had so carefully constructed. The game had changed. Rollins finally had his weapon. The discovery of the burner phone connection was the crack in the dam. Now Rollins had to break it wide open. The text message itself was cryptic, just a time and a set of GPS coordinates. 2 p.m., 33.794, 116.715. When Rollins plugged the coordinates into a map, a cold dread washed over him. It was a remote spot deep within the San Jacinto wilderness, miles from any established trail, a place no family would ever hike to. It was the location of an old, abandoned mining claim, a place forgotten by time, a perfect place to make someone disappear. This was the plot twist, the hidden clue that reframed the entire investigation. The Devil's Slide Trail wasn't the destination, it was a diversion. The struggle, the dropped items, the blood on the doggett was all theater, a carefully staged scene designed to send the search party on a wild goose chase while the real crime happened miles away. Harding hadn't just ambushed the Millers, he had lured them somewhere. But why? The motive was still a gaping void. Rollins knew he couldn't move on Harding with just a single text message. The judge would have a dozen explanations, a dozen ways. To twist it, he needed more. He needed to know what was at those coordinates. He needed to understand the why. The answer, he suspected, still lay with Julian Harding, the judge's dead son. He put Diaz back on it, but with a new, sharper focus. Forget the official records, he told her. Talk to Julian's friends, his ex-girlfriends, the people he partied with, the people who weren't afraid of his father. Find out what he was into, what he was doing in the weeks before he died. Diaz dove into the murky world of Julian's secret life. She found that the golden boy was deeply tarnished. He had a serious gambling problem, and he was in debt, not to some small-time bookie, but to a violent criminal syndicate out of Las Vegas. The overdose, she learned, was no accident. Julian had been given a hotshot, a lethal dose of fentanyl-laced heroin, a common method for mob execution. He hadn't overdosed. He had been murdered, and then she found her a former girlfriend of Julian's, a cocktail waitress named Chloe, who had fled Pine Ridge the day after his funeral. Diaz tracked her down to a dingy apartment in Barstow. Chloe was terrified, but after Diaz promised her protection, the story came pouring out. Julian, desperate to pay off his debts, had come up with a plan. His father, the judge, was a fastidious record keeper. In a hidden safe in his home office, he kept a detailed ledger. It wasn't just a record of his finances, it was a record of his corruption. Decades of it. Bribes he'd taken, verdicts he'd sold, favors he'd done for powerful people. It was his insurance policy, his leverage, his secret history of sin. Julian knew about the ledger. He planned to steal it and sell it to the highest bidder, a journalist or a political rival. Anyone who could pay enough to clear his debts and get him out of town. He told me he was going to do it, Chloe whispered, her hands trembling as she chain-smoked cigarettes. He said it was his only way out. He was more scared of his father than he was of the mob. But Julian never got the chance. His father found out. Chloe didn't know how, but she was certain of it. The night he died, she said, her voice cracking, he called me. He was frantic. He said, "My father knows, he's coming." That was the last time I ever spoke to him. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. This wasn't about the Millers at all. It was about the ledger. Rollins pulled up the case files from Julian's death. The lead investigator, the one who had signed off on the accidental overdose report, was a man who owed Harding a major favor. The medical examiner who had skipped the full toxicology screen had received a suspiciously generous loan from a company linked to one of Harding's associates a week later. The conspiracy was vast, a web of corruption with the judge at its center. But where did the Millers fit in? Rollins went back to David Miller's professional life. He was an architect. He specialized in high-end, custom homes. Rollins pulled the building permits for Judge Harding's mountain fortress. The architect of record was David Miller. He had designed the judge's house, the house with the hidden safe. Rollins felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline. David Miller wasn't just some random architect. He was the one person who would know the secret, structural details of Harding's home. He would know if there was a hidden room, a reinforced wall, a secret compartment, designed to house a safe. The theory that formed in Rollins's mind was both audacious and terrifyingly logical. Julian, in his desperation, must have approached David Miller. Maybe he offered him money. Maybe he threatened him. He needed the blueprints, the schematics, the key to finding his father's ledger. David, a man of principle, a man who followed the rules, probably refused. But maybe Julian was persuasive. Or maybe Sarah, the fierce protector, found out about it. Maybe she was the one who pushed David to do the right thing, to expose the judge. This led Rollins to the final crucial piece of the puzzle, the missing locket. He called Eleanor again. "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I need you to think very carefully. The locket, was there anything else inside it?" Besides the photos, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I don't know," she said, her voice thick with tears. Lily was always putting little things in there. A pretty pebble, a 4-leaf clover once. It was her little treasure box. Could she have put something in there that wasn't a toy? Rollins pressed. Something small? Something an adult might have given her to hold. Another pause. Then, a sharp Intake of breath. "Oh God," Eleanor whispered. "The little key." "What key?" Rollins asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. "A few days before they left," Eleanor stammered, "Lily showed it to me. A tiny little silver key. The kind you use for a diary or a small lockbox. She said it was a secret, a special key that her mummy gave her to keep safe. She said it was the key to the monster's castle. I thought it was just a game, a fairy tale she was playing. The monster's castle. Harding's house. The key to the ledger." The full, horrifying picture was now complete. Sarah Miller, having learned of the judge's corruption from a terrified Julian or a conflicted David, had decided to act. She had somehow obtained the key to the ledger. Maybe Julian gave it to her before he was killed. Maybe David had a copy. She was a paralegal. She knew what that ledger meant. It was evidence. It was justice. But she was afraid. She didn't trust the police. Not in a town where the judge held so much power. So she hid the key in the one place no one would ever think to look, her daughter's locket, and she must have made a mistake. She must have let Harding know, perhaps through an anonymous tip, that she had it. She was trying to force his hand. To create an insurance policy for her family. But she had catastrophically underestimated his ruthlessness. Harding, realizing his entire empire of lies was about to be brought down by a paralegal and an architect, arranged the meeting. He lured them to that remote spot with the burner phone. Under the pretense of a negotiation, the scene on the Devil's Slide Trail was a decoy. He must have confronted them there first, creating the scene of a struggle, grabbing the kids' things. To make it look like a chaotic abduction, he took Sarah's phone, not realizing she had already started recording. Then he forced them into a vehicle and drove them to the coordinates from the text message, to the abandoned mine. His goal was simple: get the key. The tension in the sheriff's department was now at a fever pitch. They had the motive, they had the method. They had the digital breadcrumb trail. They had the conspiracy. The stakes had shifted from a missing persons case to a deep-seated political scandal that threatened to tear the town apart. Rollins knew his next move had to be perfect. He couldn't just arrest Harding. The judge would unleash an army of lawyers who would tear the circumstantial case to shreds. He needed the ledger, and he needed the locket. He had to get into Harding's house, and he had to find that abandoned mine. He assembled a small trusted team, Diaz, Peterson, and two of his most seasoned deputies. He did it off-book, in secret. He couldn't risk a leak. "We're going in," he told them, his voice low and steady. "Diaz, Peterson, you're with me. We're going to pay a visit to the judge's wife. The rest of you, you're going to those coordinates. You're looking for a mine. And you're looking for a gravesite." He paused, the weight of his next words heavy in the air. "Be prepared for what you might find." He was no longer just a sheriff. He was the leader of a small, desperate rebellion against a corrupt king. The public scandal was about to erupt, and he was standing at ground zero. Holding the match, the confrontation had to be a thunderclap, a moment of such shocking, undeniable truth that it would shatter Harding's fortress of lies instantly. A quiet arrest and a lengthy court battle would allow him to manipulate the system he knew so well. Rollins needed a public execution, a cinematic payoff that would leave no room for doubt. He needed to expose the monster in the one place he felt most invincible, his own castle. The plan was audacious, bordering on illegal. Rollins was betting his entire career, his freedom, on a single, desperate gambit. He was going to get a confession, and he was going to broadcast it to the world. The key was Isabel Harding. Rollins and Diaz drove to the Harding estate, not in a marked police car, but in Diaz's unassuming sedan. They didn't use the main gate, which was monitored by security cameras. They parked down the road and approached the sprawling property from the back. Through the woods, like intruders, they found Isabel in the greenhouse, a cavernous glass structure filled with exotic orchids. She was tending to them with a vacant, mechanical precision, her hands trembling slightly. She looked up as they entered, her eyes wide with the terror of a cornered animal. "Mrs. Harding," Rollins began, his voice soft, "we know. We know everything. Isabel shook her head, a tear tracing a path through the powder on her cheek. You don't understand, she whispered. He'll kill me. He'll kill you anyway, Diaz said, her tone blunt but not unkind. Men like him don't leave loose ends. You are a loose end. Your son was a loose end. The Millers were a loose end. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can be his next victim, or you can be the person who ends this. Rollins stepped forward. We know about the ledger, Isabel. We know Julian tried to take it. We know that's why Thomas killed him. He let the words hang in the humid air, brutal and direct. A choked sob escaped Isabel's lips. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of years of fear and denial crumbling away. He called it an accident. She wept, her body shaking. He told me Julian was weak, that he had brought shame on the family. He made me help him clean it up. He made me lie. Where is the ledger? Rollins asked gently. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a sudden fierce resolve. The ghost of the woman she used to be. He moved it, she said. After the Millers disappeared, he knew someone might come looking. It's not in the safe anymore. She took a deep, shuddering breath. It's in his courtroom, in his chambers, behind a false panel in the bookshelf. It's the one place he knew no one would ever dare to look. It was the final piece. The perfect, poetic irony. He was hiding his crimes in the very seat of his power. He's hosting a fundraiser tonight, Isabel said, her voice stronger now. For the Police Benevolent Association, the whole town will be there. The media, the politicians. She looked directly at Rollins. He's giving a speech. About justice. About finding the animals who killed the Millers. A plan, cold and clear, crystallized in Rollins's mind. Peterson, he said into his radio, his voice a low command. I need a feed. I need you to patch into the sound system at the Harding fundraiser, and I need you to be ready to broadcast. While Rollins and Diaz were with Isabel, the other team had reached the coordinates. They found the abandoned mine, its entrance a dark, gaping maw in the side of a hill. The air around it was still and cold, and in a shallow, hastily dug grave a few yards from the entrance, beneath a pile of rocks and branches, they found them. David, Sarah, and Mason. The scene was one of unspeakable brutality. But there was no sign of Lily. One of the deputies, a young man with a strong stomach, ventured into the mine shaft, his flashlight cutting a nervous beam through the oppressive darkness, and there, in the back of the tunnel, he found her. She was alive. Lily Miller was huddled in a corner, filthy and emaciated, but breathing. She was in shock, her eyes vacant, her small body curled into a ball. And clutched in her hand, so tightly that her knuckles were white, was her silver locket. Harding, in his haste, in his monstrous focus on the parents, had made a fatal error. He had assumed the little girl was too weak, too terrified, to survive on her own. He had left her for dead. He had left a witness, and he had left the key. The deputy wrapped her in his jacket, murmuring soft, comforting words, and carried her out into the sunlight. He radioed Rollins. Sheriff, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We have a survivor. We have Lily. And she has the locket. The fundraiser was in full swing. The Harding estate was ablaze with lights. The sound of champagne glasses and polite laughter spilling out onto the manicured lawns. Judge Thomas Harding stood at a podium, bathed in a warm, flattering spotlight. He was at the height of his power, the benevolent king, addressing his loyal subjects. Double quotes, ... and we will not rest. He was saying, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. Until the perpetrators of this heinous act are brought to justice, the Miller family deserves nothing less. Rollins and Diaz entered through the back of the grand ballroom. Flanking Isabel, the crowd murmured, surprised to see the sheriff, and even more surprised to see the judge's wife looking so defiant, so changed. Harding faltered, his eyes locking on his wife. He saw the betrayal in her face, and for the first time, a flicker of panic crossed his features. What is the meaning of this? He boomed, trying to regain control. Rollins walked to the podium, taking the microphone from its stand. He looked out at the sea of confused, expectant faces. "Judge Harding is right," he said, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the room, and, thanks to Peterson, across every police radio channel in the county. "The Miller family does deserve justice." He turned to face Harding. "And we know who the perpetrator is." From the back of the room, 2 uniformed deputies entered. Between them walked a small, frail figure wrapped in a blanket. It was Lily. Her face was smudged with dirt, her eyes wide and haunted. But she was alive. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The air crackled with disbelief and horror. Lily's eyes found Harding at the podium. Her small face, which had been a mask of shock, suddenly contorted, not with fear, but with a pure, childlike rage. "You," she whispered. Her voice barely audible, but in the stunned silence of the room, it was like a gunshot. She raised a trembling finger and pointed at the judge. "You're the bad man. You hurt my mummy." Harding's face went white. The mask of civility shattered, revealing the snarling monster beneath. "She's delirious," he spat. "The trauma, is it trauma, Judge?" Rollins's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Or is it the truth?" He held up a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was the silver locket and the tiny key. "Is this why you did it? The key to your ledger? The one you keep behind? The copy of Moby Dick in your chambers?" The blood drained from Harding's face. It was a direct hit. A detail so specific, so secret, it could only have come from someone who knew. He was trapped, exposed, his deepest secret laid bare in front of the very people he had ruled over. He lunged, not at Rollins, but at Lily. It was a primal, desperate act of a cornered beast trying to silence the last witness. But the deputies were ready. They intercepted him, tackling him to the ground in a clumsy, undignified heap. The ballroom erupted into chaos. People were screaming, shouting, their phones held aloft, recording the downfall of a titan. The reporters, who had been there to cover a society fundraiser, were now at the center of the biggest scandal in the state's history. As they cuffed him, as they read him his rights, Harding's eyes met Rollins's. They were filled not with remorse, but with a pure, bottomless hatred. The public humiliation was a fate worse than prison for him. Rollins leaned down, his face close to Harding's. "It's over, Tom," he said, his voice low. The cinematic payoff was complete. Not in a courtroom, but in the judge's own palace, his empire crumbling around him, broadcast live for all to see. The arrest was public, the exposure total, the justice swift and brutal. The wolf had been unmasked in the middle of the flock, and the footage would go viral before the sun came up. The aftermath was a long, slow exhale after a scream that had held the whole town captive. The fall of Judge Thomas Harding was as swift and brutal as his reign had been long and absolute. The video from the fundraiser, captured on 100 smartphones, became a viral sensation, a raw, unfiltered spectacle of justice. The monster, unmasked and pathetic, was no longer a titan, just a man in handcuffs, his bespoke suit rumpled. His face a mask of impotent rage, the ledger, recovered from his chambers exactly where Isabel had said it would be, was a bombshell. It implicated dozens of powerful people across the state, politicians, business leaders, even other judges. It triggered a massive corruption investigation that would clean house in a way no election ever could. The system Harding had so expertly manipulated was now turning on itself, devouring the rot from within. Harding, facing a mountain of evidence and the testimony of his own wife, took the coward's way out. He hanged himself in his jail cell before the trial could even begin. Leaving a legacy not of justice, but of shame, Pine Ridge began the slow, painful process of healing. The story of the Millers became a local legend, a cautionary tale about the darkness that can hide behind a respectable facade. The Devil's Slide Trail was renamed the Miller Memorial Trail, and at the trailhead, where Gus had been found, a simple granite bench was installed. It looked out over the valley, a quiet place for reflection. Lily went to live with her grandmother, Eleanor. The physical wounds healed, but the emotional scars ran deep. For months, she didn't speak. She would sit for hours, clutching the silver locket, her eyes distant and old. A team of therapists worked with her, gently, patiently, coaxing her back from the silent, dark place she had retreated to. The town wrapped its arms around her and Eleanor, a quiet, collective atonement for their willingness to believe the lies, for their blindness to the evil in their midst. They brought casseroles, mowed the lawn, and respected their privacy, offering a silent, steady stream of support. The first word Lily spoke was Gus. The golden retriever, who had never left her side since her return, licked her face, his tail thumping a frantic, joyous rhythm against the floor. It was the beginning. Slowly, painstakingly, Lily began to reclaim her childhood. There were still nightmares. There were still days when the silence would descend upon her again. But there were also moments of laughter, of a gap-toothed smile, of a little girl chasing a butterfly in her grandmother's garden. Sheriff Rollins became a reluctant hero. He was lauded for his courage, for his unwavering pursuit of the truth. But the victory felt hollow. He would often visit the Miller Memorial Trail. Sitting on the granite bench as the sun set, the sky turning the same brilliant shades of orange and pink that David Miller had so loved. He thought of the cost of the truth, of the lives shattered, of the innocence lost. He had won the war, but the ghosts of the battlefield would walk with him forever. Isabel Harding left Pine Ridge. She sold the monstrous house on the hill and donated the proceeds to a charity for victims of violent crime. She changed her name and moved to a small, anonymous town by the sea, seeking a quiet place to live out her days with the ghosts of her son and her husband. She had been both a victim and an enabler, a figure of tragedy and complexity, and she sought not forgiveness, but oblivion. The final, lingering emotional echo of the tragedy came a year later. On the anniversary of the disappearance, a small, quiet ceremony was held at the trailhead. Eleanor was there holding Lily's hand. Rollins, Diaz, and the other deputies stood respectfully at a distance. The townspeople came, leaving flowers and small stones at the base of the memorial bench. As the ceremony ended, Lily, holding a single perfect white rose, walked away from her grandmother and approached Rollins. She stood before him, a small, solemn figure, and looked up at him with eyes that held a wisdom far beyond her years. "Thank you for finding me," she said, her voice clear and steady. She held out the rose. Rollins knelt down to take it, his throat tight with emotion. As his fingers brushed hers, he saw the locket, still hanging around her neck. It was polished, gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was no longer a hiding place for a terrible secret, but a simple, beautiful reminder of the family she had lost, and the love that still surrounded her. He watched as she walked back to her grandmother, her small hand once again finding its place in Eleanor's. They stood together, two survivors against the vast, beautiful, and sometimes terrible backdrop of the mountains. The story of the Millers had ended in tragedy, but it had also ended in a testament to resilience, to the enduring strength of a little girl who had walked out of the darkness, and to the quiet, unassuming courage of those who had lit the way. For her, the wound on the town would scar over, but it would never fully disappear. A haunting reminder of the weekend a family went for a hike and walked into a nightmare, and of the long, dark shadow that evil can cast, even in the brightest of places.